about the community and what that means. So everyone, my understanding is that everyone has received this book, Possibilities. And so I'm hoping that you will have that handy with you, because I will be referencing various aspects of the book, because basically I'm going to take you through how to use this resource so that it's meaningful to you, but more importantly, because many of you are teacher leaders, consultants, possibly administrators, you have leadership and co-learning privilege in the educational spaces that you occupy. And so you're going to be sharing, hopefully you're going to be sharing out what you're going to be learning throughout the conference today, including this workshop, with others. So I'm going to take you through how to use this resource to be able to do that professional development, or to shift your staff or group or teacher candidates, whatever it is for you, forward into considering issues of poverty as it relates to Ontario schooling. So here's what our agenda is going to look like. We're going to be focusing on doing some welcoming, thinking about poverty in our own lives in order to ground the work in our own experiences, then look at assumptions and stereotypes that we may have around it, because we know that that's important in order to move the work forward, look at what poverty looks like in our schools, and all that will be while we explore the book and how it can be used. So here's some of our inquiry questions, our key questions as we work together for the next hour and a bit. What can educators and school communities do to better understand and support children and families living in poverty? What can educators do to challenge assumptions and deficit-based thinking towards children and communities experiencing poverty? And what are some of the more successful and creative educational approaches to engaging children, parents, and communities who are experiencing poverty? I want you to be able to leave. I'm hoping that the goal is for you to be able to leave and have something that you're going to move forward with, right? Because there's so much learning that's happening, particularly in this day and time of COVID, where all our learning is happening virtually. There's more of an opportunity to get learning from a variety of different places and spaces, people, organizations, not to mention just the educational spaces that we are a part of. And so we're getting a lot of information, but it's really back to what our speakers talked about this morning. It's the action. If we want to be anti anything, anti means action. What is the opposite of anti is of a thing is anti something. And then that means there has to be action. So we're going to focus on what action can you take after leaving our learning today. So of course, when we are doing any kind of learning like this, when we're going to be having conversations that deals with aspects of our identity or aspects of other people's identities and the advantages and disadvantages that they may have based on that, we have to frame our conversations around norms that we're going to agree with. And so I'm going to bring these norms forward as something for us to consider as we're working together today. And I want us to focus on encouraging diverse perspectives, because we're all coming from different experiences, both personally and within the work that we do in education. So we want to make sure that we want those perspectives to be shared. We want them to be honored, because that is how we're going to learn, right? And when we're thinking about issues of poverty, that might present itself differently in whatever context, depending on the part of the province you're living in, depending on what school board you're with, etc., or the area within the province, etc. So we're going to really honor that piece. And then also feel free to share only what you're comfortable sharing. You decide how you participate and how you don't participate in the learning that we're going to be doing, but of course, always staying actively engaged. So the first thing we're going to do is an opportunity for us to get to know each other a little better. And I encourage you to, in the chat, to write a little bit about who you are. You might want to put like your board. That would be interesting, maybe the board and the role that you're in. So we just have an idea of who's in the space and who our co-learners are today. But we're going to, while you think about that and write that in the chat, I want you to think about poverty in your own life. Where have you experienced poverty, or where have you seen it? And the thing about poverty is that's the one leveler. Poverty happens everywhere. And regardless of where you are, regardless of who you are, poverty does impact us all and can impact you directly. So I want you to think about poverty, how you have experienced or seen poverty in your own life. And I'm going to use myself as an example. So I was born in England, but raised in Canada from two parents who are from the Caribbean. My dad is from Barbados and my mom is from Trinidad. And they were able to go initially to England and then come to Canada during a time in Canadian history where there was a need for domestic workers. And so the government kind of changed their immigration policy and were actually seeking out people who lived in, at that time, islands that were still owned by England, who Canada also was owned by at that time. And so they were saying, well, we need more nurses, we need more garbage collectors, we need more people working with the elderly, we need more kind of people to take like maids and things like that, housekeepers, things like that. And so they actively sought out people from the Caribbean islands. And for people in the Caribbean islands, this was their opportunity to be able to leave the island, get training, and have a better life, pretty much. And both of my parents in two different islands left their islands to go to England to receive that training and eventually came to Canada. I was raised in Canada and my parents came, and of course they were struggling because they were new to the country, new to the opportunities here, even though they had received training in their respective careers. It was a completely new experience. And so I grew up with issues of poverty, but never knew it. I wasn't like, woe is me, I'm living in poverty. Like, we have that stereotype that that's how children or people think of their situation. And I never did. And the reason why I'm seeing this as someone who now lives a middle-class lifestyle, and I can look at it from a different lens now, my own experience, it's because I was rich in love, I was rich in community, I was rich in heritage, I was rich in legacy, and those things are the things that engulfed me. And so I didn't see the poverty, but I do remember going to, this is really gonna date me now. Like, if you thought I was old before, now you're really gonna know I'm old. Nob Hill Farms. So those people who live in Toronto will know about Nob Hill Farms if you're of a certain age. Cassandra, I know already, does not know about Nob Hill Farms. Maybe she does, but she probably does. So I remember going to Nob Hill Farms and going in the chicken line. There was a lineup that you would have to go in to get the cheap chicken. And at the time, cheap chicken was the wings. Now, wings now is the most expensive part of the chicken. When you go to Costco and buy wings, it's really expensive. But back then, the wings were the throwaway. And so you could get like pounds and pounds of wings for like 5 cents a pound, 10 cents a pound kind of thing. So I remember my mom making me stand in the chicken line because you could only have a maximum of, let's say, 2 pounds or whatever it was. So she would stand in the line and I would stand in the line so that we each would get 4 pounds as opposed to just 2 to max out the limits. And I remember eating chicken wings all the time, but my mom was an amazing cook, so she would prepare them in different ways, right? These are all signs of having issues of poverty. I never thought of it that way. I never saw myself that way. And even when I talk to my parents now, and we reminisce about, things that have happened in our childhood, myself and my brother, my younger brother, and I'll say, yeah, and I'll mention, yeah, we did have issues of poverty. And they're like, what are you talking about? We were not poor. We were not poor. We were not, like, they were very offended by that, very highly offended. So that's how poverty kind of played out in my own life. And my parents over time were able to move to a different place socio-economically and did very well. But I did grow up with issues of that. And that is how poverty plays out. But I want you to have an opportunity to kind of think about that for yourself and how you see poverty play out. And it may not be for you, it might be something that you see or something that you've heard within your experience. So we're going to go into breakouts now for you to be able to do that. And as you go into your breakouts, I want you to remember to introduce yourself to those who will be in your breakout, because those people might be new to you. So take a minute just to say hello, to welcome each other, and then go into the conversation about where you've seen poverty. And then we'll come back together as a larger group to share common understandings and the connections that you've made regarding the stories that you have shared. Thank you, even for putting them into groups, and we'll see you in a little bit. Enjoy the process.
Okay, Charmain, before I put them into groups, I'm just checking to make sure that you want that scenario in in the chat or no? Not at this time.
No, not this time.
Okay, so here we go, folks. I'm going to launch those breakout rooms, and it's just an automatic assign. I'm just going to ask you, it'll prompt you to join, and please go ahead and do that. Here we go. Here they come. Charmaine, that prompt is for which time?
Nearer to the end, and I'm questioning whether I might actually get to it.
Yeah, okay,
but
no problem.
I'll prompt you to it when
Perfect,
it's
thank you.
time.
Yeah.
I'd love to open the floor just for a little bit, like 1 minute, for you to share what you and your group's thinking was in the large group, and feel free to use the chat if you'd like to share that way. And if anybody would like to unmute and just share what connections you made or understandings or questions that you have based on your conversation, we're open to that now.
Charmaine, I'd just like to say one thing that you said that really resonated in terms of moving from that deficit model, or when you talked about how you didn't realize you were in poverty because you were so loved. And I shared with my group that I've taught students who had so much and were impoverished in terms of family connection. They were loved, but they were loved with stuff. And I mean, they were loved, I'm sure emotionally, but their parents were so busy trying to get the stuff that the time that they was so limited in what they spent with their children. And that was a really powerful point you made that resonated with me.
Thank you, Susan.
It's Belinda. Can I chime in?
Please.
I didn't get a chance to, my group had a great conversation and people did some amazing sharing. And it was just interesting to think about the notion of poverty and how it's impacted you. And one of the people that spoke in our group talked about not recognizing that as a child, they sort of tried to hide their poverty and didn't recognize what they were doing until, many years later when they had time to sort of think about it. And I think that if you don't have an opportunity to think about it, you often don't recognize sort of where, like, you're unable to position yourself as to, like, yeah, I lived in poverty, or like I had kind of an experience of poverty, but I didn't know it, or I did these things, like we had somebody else share, like I removed myself from extracurricular activities so that my parents only had to pay for one. So, children are acutely aware of their situation and then work to try to, provide some sort of resolve, right? Like, and I think that's, incredible and also like tragic at the same time, right? So it was just interesting to hear, the different people, different experiences of people, and sort of how they sort of mitigated, their experiences, as children. So
yeah, and that goes to show you how systemic that the social dominant norm around socioeconomic status is, right? That even children, like, because everything that they're seeing in the media, everything that they're seeing around them places them in a particular position. And we know that those who have money, who live in a certain community, that have a certain home, that drive a certain car, that wear certain clothes, that has certain makeup, and their hair looks a certain way, and there's like all of those pieces, means that you have power, means that you have privilege. It means that you're able to do things and say things and navigate places differently than someone who doesn't have those things. So our learners may not identify it because they don't have the language for it. They don't understand all of those structural pieces, but they sense it. They feel it in themselves. Now, did I know, though I was very well loved and all of those pieces and had faith, I had a very strong faith basis to help support. I had those supports, which helped to build my resiliency, which we'll talk about. But I don't know, I've lost my train of thought, but like, I'm just thinking like our learners may not have that understanding, but they sense it, they feel it in their bodies. They know, hey, how I'm dressing or what I don't have is different than someone else. But what they don't think is, oh, that's because of, my community is underserviced. They're not thinking that. They're thinking it's something that I've done. It's something that's wrong with me. It becomes internalized. And so that's the piece that we're fighting against, right? It's the emotional things, the mental wellness pieces that impact it. Great. I see some things are happening in the chat too. Thank you so much for that. So, so let's kind of like take these stories now. And I think it's important for us to kind of self-reflect on what experiences that we've had with poverty in order to ground statistics and to put faces to the numbers. And I'm just going to quickly go through, I'm going to have you read through some of the numbers here, just so that we understand how prevalent this is in the work that we do. So 1 in 5 children are living in poverty. So let's just break that down. Think of any kind of classroom, whether it's kindergarten all the way up to secondary. There's going to be children in that classroom. I don't care what area you're living in or working in, there's going to be. For instance, I work for the York Region District School Board, and throughout our board, there was this kind of unsaid messaging that we don't have poverty in York Region, we're York Region. Right? And nobody was thinking about that. And in some areas, particularly in Richmond Hill, people say there's no poverty in Richmond Hill. It just looks different because we have a stereotype of what it looks like. And it doesn't match what we're seeing. But families, there might be 4 or 5 families living in one home. Right? So we have to change our thinking about what that looks like and know that this is a reality in our classrooms right now. And you can see 19.6% of children under the age of 6 are living in poverty. They're coming into our system that way, right? And we know that poverty shifts and changes depending on family situation, which we'll talk about. When we look at this data and we look at poverty in terms of race, immigration status, and Indigenous identity, it becomes very, very clear. And thinking about what our speaker spoke about this morning, this becomes even more real for us as educators in terms of our thinking. So here we're seeing that Indigenous communities and children in those communities are the highest impacted by far. And then racialized and those who are new to the country as well. So if you're in communities that have that, when we think of those who are Syrian refugees, et cetera, these learners are at the highest risk or are living with issues of poverty. And so we have to consider, how are we embracing spaces in the work that we do with learners and their families. And then when we break those down further and we think of Black children, we know that all boards right now, due to the ministry's direction, is asking us to consider boards in our schools and in our communities. And so these numbers, we have to also think with that, and within that work, the intersectionality of things such as poverty. So 27% of Black children, 0 to 14, that's pretty much all of elementary, they're living in a family with poverty. So we have to think about, when we think about anti-Black racism, we also have to think about it within the intersectionality of the other oppressions that are upon them, upon these learners. And so then that might make us then we need to think about, hey, maybe some of the behaviors that we're seeing maybe it's not coming out of them just wanting to be disruptive or whatever. Maybe it's because they're hungry, or maybe because they're frustrated with their home situation the way that it is. Because when they go home, maybe there's no lighting, maybe there's no heating, maybe they're sleeping in a bed with 3 or 4 other people, 3 other siblings. Maybe they're a child who has to take care of another child because their parents are doing shifts, right? And this isn't just for the Black community, this is for all communities, right? So many of our learners are coming to us and yeah, they're happy and they're joyful when they're at school, and they should be, because the school should be the brave space for them to be able to be who they really are. But when they leave our walls, they might have to gather all the laundry and take it down to the laundromat once a week as a 10-year-old, as a 12-year-old, as a 14-year-old, as a 16-year-old. That might be their responsibility because their family member, whoever is caring for them, is working or not working, not able to work, etc. And then thinking about the impacts of COVID. Now there's a whole other layer now, and opportunities for further vulnerability for all of us. We're all impacted by it, yes, but particularly for those who have socioeconomic challenges, who have home insecurity, food insecurity. It's now an additional layer. And so when we look at these numbers of jobless rates, that's impacting all of us, but the more vulnerable impact are those communities that we've just talked about. So we have to really think about that and digest that. And the data that I was looking at, which came out of the Raising Canada report, the 10 influences, I forget how they framed it, but like the 10 the most impactful things that impact children's health and well-being, with poverty being, I don't know if it was ranked in order, but poverty was number 4 on that list. Indigenous people saw no change. So their situation prior to COVID is exactly the same as it is. That's a big that is something we need to really process in light of what our speaker spoke about this morning as well. And then many times when we think about poverty, we're looking at it as there's a line, which Canada doesn't really have, but like there's a line of poverty. And if you're above the line, you're good, you're not in poverty. And if you're below the line, you're not. But there's other things that we need to consider as well, like the Deprivation Index. And these are, what you see on your screen now is the 10 items that are necessary for a household to have a standard living above the poverty line. And when you look at this list, like having a home and apartment that's free of pests, having friends or family over for a meal at least once a month. These are something that some of us are privileged with that we don't even think about, right? But these are the indicators that many of our learners might be challenged with. I had a story of a teacher candidate. We were doing some of this work in the course, one of the courses that I teach with them. And one teacher candidate so bravely shared about her experience growing up in school. And she, again, just like me, she said, I never thought of it as us having issues of poverty because she had, a very strong family base and was very well loved, etc. But she said we had to keep, every family member had a duffel bag or plastic bags where all their clothes stayed in. And she never understood as a child why they had to do it. It was just what they did. They kept all their clothes in a bag. And she said it wasn't until she was older she realized it was because their apartment was infested with bed bugs. And so in order to keep their clothes from having that, and then, the impacts of that, they always kept their clothes in bags. And she said it wasn't until I was older and I visited a friend's home and I saw her clothes hung up in a closet that I realized, oh, this isn't how you keep your clothes, right? And she remembered digging into the bag every day, right? So these things that many of us don't even have to consider, many of our learners are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Being able to get dental care if needed, right? Many of us are privileged having dental plans and benefits that cover those things. We don't have to really consider that. Being able to repair broken electrical goods like stoves, refrigerators, etc. Fresh fruits and vegetables. Okay, so this I totally understand, because there are some times when the price of cauliflower is like half of a mortgage payment during certain times of the year, right? And so when we think about our learners, and we have to be very careful of food shaming, right? Many times I've in my own practice, I've seen teachers who look at a child during lunchtime and say, why is your lunch only got snacks in it? Why do you only have Lunchables? Tell your family that Lunchables is not a healthy meal and that it doesn't follow the food guide and all of that. We have to be very, very careful of that kind of messaging to our learners. Because when Lunchables are on sale at $1 at no frills, that's a lot. And you have 3 children that you have to prepare lunch for every day, 5 days a week to go to school when we're in school. Yes, when we're in face-to-face learning. Getting bread, to be able to do a Lunchable is a lot more economically friendly than buying bread, buying sliced meat, buying cheese, or like, don't even talk about the price of cheese, buying cheese, buying lettuce to make a sandwich to send for each child. That becomes more expensive than buying the Lunchable, right? So when we see our students bringing these kind of lunches, we have to be very mindful that we're not food shaming. Or telling students, okay, I'm gonna take this away. I've seen this too. I'm gonna put this to the side. You don't eat this until you've eaten the good things that are in your lunch, kind of thing. We can't do that, right? We need to rethink that. Let's say that. We need to rethink that type of messaging. And of course, it's coming from a place of good intent. But as our speakers talked about this morning, the difference between intent and impact can be very, very different. And so we always have to put the attention on what will the impact of what I'm saying, what I'm doing, the decisions that we're making as a staff going to have on our learners. So thinking about the data that you just saw and thinking about the deprivation index, connecting that to what you've already talked about in terms of how you've experienced poverty, how does this information connect with your thinking? And how will it impact the work that we do? Does it impact the work that we do in schools? What do we need to be considering? What do we need to be questioning? What do we need to be learning about in order to be able to address what is actually happening? And sometimes we can see it. We might be working in a school community where it's clear that there's issues of poverty, and then we might be working in a community where it's not as obvious. Okay. So we're going to put you back into your breakout rooms at this time. Ian, we don't need this scenario at this time. And so have that conversation. We'll come back to chat as a larger group. So you'll be back in the same groups, which is wonderful. So you get to connect again with the same people you had before. Yeah, for sure. And until you've had spatterings of that yourself, it is hard to kind of see, but that's why it's important for us as educators to really get to know our communities, like really get to know them. And back to what our presenters shared this morning, ask them, go to them, get to know them on their turf, in their spaces. We're always inviting them to our spaces. Let's go to their spaces. But we'll go into that. Thank you so much for sharing that really impactful story. Welcome back, everybody. I'd love to open the floor just for a minute to hear what some common thinking that you and your group had, any insights that you'd like to share with the larger community. Feel free to use the chat, of course, but if you'd like to unmute and share, please feel free to do that.
A really helpful comment was made that before we make a judgment about anything we observe, that we check it out with other colleagues because they may know the reason for what we're observing. And then that way we can be more empathic in terms of how we respond to it. And I really think that's a very good idea, because otherwise, if we haven't had the experience of poverty ourselves, then we have no place from our own experience to kind of make a judgment about it.
It's absolutely imperative that we understand other people's narrative. And that comes with actually asking and getting to know people on that level, right? So thank you for bringing that forward.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Martha.
Thank you. I was really reflecting on, what was spoken about before. Twofold really is that, sometimes in my own experience, I just recently had discussions with my parents about what it was like growing up as a new immigrant family and coming to terms that I was growing up in poverty. So that whole thing that you're saying is that, you know, they might be in that situation, but if their family is not making them feel that way, they don't necessarily know, you know. And I'm unraveling this as an adult, understanding my place of privilege, you know, from a financial perspective compared to where my family was and where they came from. So that's one thing that I'm really reflecting on, is that, you know, we could be trying to understand their experience, but to them, their experience isn't understanding the level of poverty they're in perceptually at that moment. So that's one important thing. Now, as a parent, I'm reflecting on my own words with my son on a balanced meal and ensuring that he's eating enough fruit and vegetables. And I'm recognizing that he is communicating to me what he observes in the lunches of his peers. So he'll say to me, so-and-so doesn't eat properly. They always have snacks in their food. And so when you were talking about the Lunchables, like, I was like, my goodness, like, how as a parent now am I going to allow my son to not have that critical lens, you know, and how am I going to explain that to him in a way that he's not going to have a preconceived notion or a judgment on someone? And so I want to thank you for bringing that forward, because like, sometimes I just want to mute myself, you know, and I'm realizing that I want to just be constantly listening and learning. So
You're welcome. And just because I know I'll forget if I don't mention it at the moment, if to have that conversation with your child, there's a great book. There's so many wonderful books that address poverty. One in particular called Maggie's Fridge. I should have brought it to show you, but Maggie's Fridge is a great one to start that conversation, particularly around that, because it looks at that particular issue of like one child who observes another child not having, and how that's played out. So that might be a good one to have that kind of conversation with. And again, literature is such a great way to be able to place the issue here, because many of us as educators, we're kind of cautious about having these kind of conversations and learning within the classroom, whether it's around anti-Black racism, whether it's about anti-homophobia, anything, any part of the identity flower, right? And so, but if we put the issue here in a book, then we can all bring our experience to that character or to that situation, rather than saying, here's me as the teacher telling you, you know, what it is or whatever. Thank you for that. I think there was someone else who would like to share.
That was me, Charmaine. I'm getting a little nervous about it. I'm hoping that as we have this conversation, that we all just remain really cognizant of the fact that many times we make assumptions that put children into situations that they aren't. And so this concept of, we know that there are this percentage of Black children who live in poverty, and there's a percentage of, you know, so many children in our classes will be in poverty, et cetera, that we don't look at what's happening, the food they bring, the what they do, all of those pieces, and put it in the context. So just as an example, my son, when he started at nursery school, and the teacher was having this conversation with us about how, you know, does he know how to paint and this? And I was thinking, oh my God, my child's, no, I don't paint at my house. And she was really desperately trying to figure out how to get around this topic of, can you afford to buy paints for your child? And all of a sudden it hit me, and I got a little, I said, listen, my child can read, but he can't paint because I've never done it. But of course I went out and bought him paints, because that's what you do when they tell you these things. But I realized that, you know, people make assumptions based on what children don't have or what children don't do. And so try not to put them in boxes, because a lot of times it's the culture they come from. They might know lots about different kinds of vegetables, right? Or different kinds of fruits or different kinds of foods. It just won't be the same as what your child is bringing. So I was thinking about what Martha was saying. And, you know, one of the things to talk about is, okay, they don't have, you know, a ham sandwich, they have something else. What is it that they're having? And have that conversation as well, to ensure that they're not making assumptions about poverty that are connected to culture instead of it's not us, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you for that. Jason, I see your hand up.
Question, because I've been doing a lot of reading about nutrition and its effect on the brain and stomach health and everything. And I'm grappling with this idea because yes, we don't want to judge food, obviously, for sure, and food shame children. But how do we, I guess, systemically look at this? Because we know that a lot of these multinational companies are particularly targeting children with their advertising, and particularly targeting groups that they know they'll say, all right, well, we're doing this, because it's kind of healthy, but it's not really. And I think that, a previous speaker talked about how we could look at other cultures that bring in different types of food. And, I'm thinking of things like legumes and other things that could be substitutes. But my issue is that we know that children's nutrition is so critical to their development, yet we don't have a national food policy, for instance. We don't really address this. We've done, I think, patchwork, and I just see over the years in education how many children I've worked with that you could tell they were struggling to meet their daily requirements. And I guess I'm just concerned about that in the development, especially as, you even look at things like organic foods and all that, that's a very privileged position to be in, to be able to afford or even access those type of things. So just kind of a bigger conversation if anybody felt that they wanted to weigh in on that, because just some of the readings I've been doing around that.
Thank you, Jason. Angela, I see your hand up.
Yes, our group, we had a discussion, and one of the things that resonated with me was just the thought of, yes, I do, as a teacher in a school, yes, I can make change within my school, within my classroom for my students directly, but I just feel like it's not enough of an impact. It's not a true disruption of poverty at a systemic level. And I just wish I knew of ways that I can make a bigger difference. And I'm saying that because I really mean that. And I don't know where you would start, and I don't know how you would do it on a larger scale and have a bigger impact. And I was wondering if you had any suggestions that you could offer later.
I do have some suggestions, and my suggestion is to continue doing the work that you're already doing, because it's the small things that lead to the big things. And if we continuously wait for systems to make the changes, we'll be waiting a long time. And I think in education, many times we do that. We think the systemic pieces are happening from the ministry and from the government and all those pieces, but it's actually the day-to-day decisions that we make as educators in the classroom every day that actually upholds the systemic barriers, including those around issues of poverty. And so the more that we embrace this in our own learning and having these kind of conversations to break down the stereotypes, so that we can see truly the learner rather than just the circumstance, then we'll be able to put into place those things within our school. Let's move forward with that so I can show you some examples of what other schools have done, so that you can see, oh, wow, I can see where that little thing, what might be looked upon as little, can actually bring a lot of momentum and a lot of change. Thank you so much for all of your sharing. So in the book Possibilities, those questions, that thinking, because when you do your staff and you're journey together as a staff and doing this kind of work, you can't start with just, hey, we know our kids are having problems and our kids are poor, and so experience, so that they can use that empathy. It looks at the language that we're calling it home insecurity, around people who live in poverty, because we have that you're sitting on a corner, like that's kind of the stereotype that we get from media, all kinds of media around that. And we have to break that down, because home insecurity looks a lot of ways. It looks like a mother with 2 children who are living with a friend because they don't have a home. So they don't have their own home, but they're living with someone else, right? So here's some questions that you can bring forward to your staff to kind of get to poverty in your school. Because once you've done that self-reflection and you've started to break down and bring forward some of the stereotypes and biases that we may have around people who have issues of poverty, and again, intersected with race, geography, all of those pieces, ability, etc. Here's some questions we can bring forward too. Why should we care about poverty? Why is this important? How does it impact learning? And we know what those indicators are. Students don't come to school. There's absentee challenges. The students might be lethargic. They might have social challenges, being able to make friends and to keep friends. And some of them don't want to make friends because they're moving around all the time. They move from place to place to place as rents change, and they have to change locations because of rent challenges, etc. Housing insecurity. So they move around a lot. So a lot of learners don't want to make friends. They don't want to invest. So their behavior might come out in a different way. I'm gonna fight against this because I don't want to invest in it as much as I really love it, because I'm gonna leave and I'm gonna miss it. And I don't want to have that feeling. So better put up that wall that I'm not gonna feel it, so that I don't feel that hurt, because I've felt it before, right? And then what does poverty look like in school? This one's really interesting. When I've taken staffs through this exercise, what does poverty look like? It's very interesting because this is where the stereotypes come out. Things like students smelling like smoke, students smelling like weed. That's what poverty looks like to them. Students wearing the same clothes all the time. The back of their ears are dirty. These are things that I'm hearing from educators in terms of what poverty looks like to them. And so when staffs go through this exercise and really be brave and bring out those things and write it on chart paper or however you document it, then you can, as the leader, as the co-learner, is to kind of dissect, where are these ideas coming from? Where are these, and how can that thinking shift what we do in the classroom? So is that leading to asset-based thinking or deficit-based thinking in terms of our learners? And so it might lead to what Paul Gorski calls the culture of poverty myth. The idea that poor people share more or less monolithic or predictable beliefs, values, and behaviors. That this is the way that they are, this is the way they enjoy being, and they only look one way, right? And so for educators, even those of us with the best intentions and love and care for our learners, that myth has to be challenged in order to reach a deeper understanding of class and poverty. Because if we don't, it could lead to low expectations, a fear of our learners, because especially in secondary schools, we might look at that as something that we need to fear in our students because of maybe behavior or how they present themselves within spheres and how we experience them. And then it diverts the attention away from the real issue, which is these are underserviced communities. They don't have the resources that they need. They don't have access to fresh vegetables. Because, and somebody mentioned in the chat about grocery deserts. They might be living in an area where you just can't access grocery stores. And if you don't have a car and you have to take an Uber or a taxi to go get your food, that gets expensive. So you can't because it comes back to those decision-making pieces as someone living with issues of poverty. Do I give my child a few dollars to buy something at the Scholastic Book Fair? Or do I use it to keep the lights on this month? Do I send the money for the field trip to go to the ROM so that my kid can participate like every other kid? Or do I save it for the phone bill so that when I get the call for that job, I can answer it? Do I give my child money do I put money out for extra pairs of shoes, indoor shoes, outdoor shoes? If you're in kindergarten, indoor, 2 extra sets of clothing to be left at school in case there's an accident. Do I put money towards that and multiply it by the 3 kids that I have? Or do I put that money towards buying food this month or buying gas for the car or whatever those deprivation index pieces, fixing the stove, fixing the refrigerator, right? So these are decisions that our families are making on a day-to-day basis that we all make those decisions. But those families that are challenged with finances have to think of it differently. And many times their children are supporting that, whether they're older children who are working part-time and contributing to the family, and so therefore can't get their homework done. Somebody mentioned that in the chat as well about, can't get their homework done because they have to work a shift in order to help their families make rent or buy food or pay for something for a younger sibling. I had an experience, just quickly, so I know time is just fluttering away, when I was renovating my my basement, and my laundry room is part of the basement, so that was all being renovated. And so we did not have our laundry room for quite a few weeks. And so we went to a laundromat, and it was my first experience of going to a laundromat since I was a toddler, I would imagine. And I was shocked at how expensive it is to do 4 loads of laundry at a laundromat. You've got to bring your own soap. You got to bring all of that stuff that you got to put into it. But the cost, it was like $10 a load. And a family of 4, which I have, we had a minimum of 4 loads. And that was just, so $10, that's $40 to do your laundry. So if you're doing that every week, that was a real eye opener for me. I was like, oh my goodness. So the families that I'm working with, who I know don't have, a washer and dryer in their home or their apartment or wherever they're living, or if they do, they've got to pay for it, like how I'm doing now. They got to put coins in to do it. This is a decision between, do I do laundry or do my kids eat? Like, those are the kind of decisions families are making, and some of our learners are making on behalf of their family in order to keep things going. So when we see our learners coming to school and their winter coat is, dirty and musty and all of that, you've got to, again, going back to what I think was Eugenia, I can't remember her name, Eugenia mentioned that we're not putting a label on it necessarily, but if we know our learners, we can identify that. And you know what, not that we're going to target that learner, but more, what holistically do we need to think about as a community? So in the professional development aspect of possibilities, it takes you through, like, it has the actual lesson plans of how to take your staff through dissecting some of these situations within your school context, to think about negative comments and how to deal with it. Because some staff members was like, I'm not a social worker. This is not my job to deal with that. My job is to teach, to get up and teach biology, teach social studies, social sciences, teach language, math, whatever it is. That's my job, not to deal with this. So how do we break that down? Because if we don't address those things in our learners, they're not going to be learning anyway. Right? Okay, we're not going to do that part, but let me take you through each one of the sections of the book. So section 1 is how to teach the students that we serve. And this can look so many different ways, but some examples that I've seen is staff's doing an inventory, and this activity is actually in the book in the professional development section. Go through an exercise with your staff or with your division or whatever educational space you're in, and do an inventory of what things we ask from our families that have to do with money. So Scholastic Book Club, pizza lunch, indoor-outdoor shoes, buying Kleenex boxes to contribute to the class community, field trips, Terry Fox Run, other charity events. What are all the things that we ask? Grade 8 grad, got to buy a dress, got to get the hair done, got to, like, all of those things. Got to buy a suit. Those are things that are, of course, beautiful intent. But then it means decision making for many of our families and what that might look like. And so I always challenge schools with excursions, such as the traditional grade 8 trip. And I was supporting a school who traditionally went to Ottawa for their grade 8 trip, but this was a community that was having challenges with issues of poverty underlying it. And so I brought forward, is there something else we can think of to be able for the students to have a great experience, but isn't going to cost $500-600? Because I think that will be a challenge for many of our families. The school was very stuck on, but this is our tradition. We've got to be really careful about traditions. And so what happened was there was 20 odd students that didn't go on the grade 8 trip. What is the purpose of that then? If 20 students can't go and their families chose for them not to go, and that could be for a variety of different reasons, but that's a large number. So we have to think about those things. When we're doing field trips, how many are we doing a year? Are we thinking about holistically the whole school? Because a parent, they have a child in grade 8 and a child in grade 5 and a child in grade 1, and they're all going on field trips, $10, $20, $4, whatever, that all adds up. So thinking about those kind of things. Then the second section talks about building relationships with children and their families. How do we move from involvement to engagement of our families? So a great example was a couple of schools that I know use the money that is allocated for lunch assistance, and they kind of pulled part of that funding to use that money to hire people who were in the community who spoke the language of the majority of the students and of the families in that community, and were in touch with the community. They had ties to the community, whether they're the socialite of the community and everybody goes to them for information. And they kind of used that advocacy, that amazingness in the community, and had them work in the school. And they would work in the office. They would help with translation. They would be the touch point of what's the pulse of the community? What do they need? What are they asking for? Because the families felt comfortable, particularly around, because they spoke the same language, going to these community members and sharing with them, what's going on in the school? Why can the school do this for us? Can the school do that for us? And then they brought that information to the staff, and then the school was able to build those relationships with the families. How do we get the families to come to parent-teacher night and all these other initiatives that the school was so interested in? Now these liaisons can give that information. That was one thing that really shifted from involvement to engagement, because then the family said, you know what, the snack program is really great, but we don't eat that food. Culturally, we don't eat that food. We don't eat cereal in the morning for breakfast. Right? And guess what? The school didn't even think about that, because they're looking at it from their experience, right? So, cereal, what do people eat? They eat toast, but many cultures, they have rice and vegetables for breakfast. They have oatmeal as opposed to cold cereal, right? So we have to think about having those liaisons brought that knowledge and understanding of the community and the cultures and the faith aspects that were important to those families. So then that could be part of the planning moving forward. Basic needs and necessity, food, nutrition, which I just talked about. Mental wellness, that's a huge one. And not just for the learners, but for our families as well. There was one school that the caretakers were really upset because the kids would, in the wintertime, the kids would traipse the snow and slush and all of that into the classroom, because they would wear their boots in the classroom because they didn't have indoor shoes, because it costs money to buy indoor shoes in this particular community. And so the caretakers are upset, the teachers are upset. And of course, where does that energy go to? To the learners. The blame goes to the students that this is your fault, right? But it isn't. So what the school started doing then was they went to kind of mom and pop carpet stores, and they had the sample tiles that look like little mats stockpiled in the back when they're out of stock, like when they don't carry that carpet anymore. They have all the samples and they were just stocked in the back. They said, hey, can we have those mats? Guys said, yeah, take them. They're doing nothing. They took those mats and would line them outside the classroom door so the students could stomp out their boots and wipe their boots off, so that when they came in, less slush was coming in. That was a thing they decided. Another school actually purchased and installed washers and dryers for the community to be able to use. That was a way for them to bring the community back to, involvement, to engagement. How to bring the community into the school? Let's provide them what they need. Some schools I've visited had clothing exchange. So it wasn't like kind of, when you go to some places, it wasn't like how Zellers used to be. You remember Zellers, and the clothes would be like all over the place and half. No, this was like this was like Banana Republic. Things were like nicely stacked and organized. It looked beautiful. And so families could just come any time of the day. There was a separate, like an old book room that was now designated as the family room. And the families would come in and exchange books, exchange toys, exchange clothing for their children, for themselves. They had a computer available to them. These are all things that are already in the school. It's just a matter of shifting the thinking. Having a communal area, couches, tables, a separate coffee for families to be able to come in. Instead of having those conversations out in the street, because that's what they do. They come and walk their kids to school, and then they're all talking. You ever see that? Families are congregating outside the school, having chit chats, and everybody's inside, all the teachers, and the men is looking, what are those people, what are those parents talking about? Invite them in. So then you create an environment within the school so that when they drop off their kids, they sit down. Why stay out in the cold? Come in and have your conversation. Then the principal started having once a week, I'm gonna have coffee with you. Let's just chit chat. No big agenda. Let's just talk. And then teacher leaders started joining in when they had prep or the admin would release time so that they can move into that, etc. Oh, we're running out of time. We're past time. Quickly, section 4 looks at areas, looks at Indigenous communities, rural and urban experiences, because poverty plays out differently there. And everything's linked in the CD that's in the book. So if you use the CD, you can link to all the resources that are available there, etc. So I just want to thank you. And of course, the literature links in the book that I shared with Martha. There's tons of others that's also included in the book. So you can find lots of great resources to use in the classroom to be able to bring this learning to the classroom as well. But the big thing to remember is this is a big thing, right? So think big, start small, but start now. Think about what you're going to do. It might be showing this book to your admin, bringing it forward to your staff, adding it to your professional library at your school. It might be you reading it and picking out 1 or 2 strategies that you're going to use in your practice. But work on something. And again, those little things will grow into bigger things. I want to thank you so much for engaging and for listening and for staying a few minutes longer. I apologize for that. And I trust that there's been a little nugget of information that you can carry with you moving forward. I appreciate Ian and the team for inviting me today and allowing me to be part of your learning and you gifting me with the stories and narratives that I will now carry with me and share with others. So have a great rest of the conference, everyone. I know it's your lunchtime and enjoy your time, and thank you again.
Thanks, Charmaine.
Thank you, Charmaine.
Hi, it's Belinda. Can I just give a little thank you before people run out for lunch? First, I want to say, Charmaine, that was just too short. I really personally need more time with this topic, and it was evident by the dialogue and the speed of the chat that I'm sure the sentiment is shared by all the participants in the group. As for learnings, I think I've got like 2 pages of notes, lots and lots of great ideas and suggestions and takeaways for teachers. And I just want to thank you. You're obviously passionate about the subject, incredibly knowledgeable, and you really did facilitate a fantastic, powerful, provoking session this morning. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Belinda, for those kind words. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. I've posted in the chat box for you the link to all of the workshop links, so you can find that at 12:30, and also the plenary link, again, as a reminder that we'll be back after your workshops, after lunch, after your next series of workshops with Darlene heading us out with the keynote address. So thanks, enjoy your lunch, and enjoy your next series of workshops.